gone. But your story isn't finished yet. There's still time for edits and cuts. But before you start doing the right things, sometimes you need to stop doing the wrong things. My story, I decided to stop.
Well, I've been doing this pastor thing for about 26 years. And in those 26 years, I've heard a lot of people's personal stories. Got to hear their spiritual stories, their journey with Jesus. And that's kind of been an enjoyable sort of thing. At the same time, there's probably been moments where as the people are sharing their story, in my head I'm going, keep your poker face. Keep your poker face. Keep your mouth, don't at what they're telling. Because I don't need all the information, but sometimes people decide to share everything. And so if you ever want to share your story, I'm good with generalities. Just going to put that out there right now. But one of the things that is interesting is there's usually a thread that runs through when people are sharing their story about their walk with Jesus. And it's that at some point in time after they decided to follow Christ, there was also, I decided to stop. There was a behavior, there was an addiction, there was something self-destructive, whatever it may be. They got to that point where they said, and then I decided to stop. And maybe as you think about your own story with Jesus, think about your own journey and so on, you could think that there have been those times where you have made a conscious decision to say, I decide now to stop. Maybe it's an attitude, maybe it's a behavior, maybe it's an addiction, whatever that might be. There is that moment that you can look to and say, I made this decision to stop. So last week we started a new message series called My Story. This is my story, where I get to share about what Jesus is doing in my life. And as we think about our stories, one of the things that we have to understand is there's key decisions that need to be made. And in those key decisions, one of the things that we need to remember is this right here. The decisions you make today will determine the stories that you tell tomorrow. There are certain decisions that you will make that you don't even give a whole lot of attention to or thought to that will determine the story you tell tomorrow. So we want you to make right decisions. We want you to make good decisions. And ultimately, we want you to make decisions that will allow Jesus to write his story into your life. In fact, I want to repeat a verse that we talked about last week, which is Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. So we're focusing on this idea that Jesus desires to be the author of your story. In fact, this word author is so vitally important that we understand that it can mean champion, it can mean author, it can mean originator, it can mean pioneer, and it can mean leader. And ultimately, what I look at here is that Jesus wants to be all of everything in my story. My story does not need to be about me. It ultimately needs to be Jesus. He needs to be the star of the show. However, there are decisions that you and I can make. There are decisions that you and I can make that will either allow Jesus access into our lives, or we can cut Jesus off and make our story all about us. And so last week we talked about a very simple phrase. I decided to start. So this week we're going to kind of flip that around and say that we're going to decide to stop. As we do, we're going to look at a story from the Old Testament. We're going to look at a story from the life of Moses. It's Exodus chapter 18, if you'd like to go ahead and turn there in your Bibles. But as we think about the story here, we need to be aware of the larger story. We know that God's people were in captivity. They cried out to God. God heard their cry. He called Moses, actually called Moses from a burning bush to go to Egypt to help guide his people, God's people, out of Egypt. We're going to look at that story here in a couple of weeks. But the reality is they get there. Moses gets there with his brother Aaron. God sends 10 plagues into the land of Egypt, decimates the land, and the Israelites now leave, and they get to that point, and they cross the Red Sea. We've all seen the movie 10 Commandments for Charlton Heston and so on like that. We have that picture in our mind. That's probably not the picture that we're going to be able to Netflix in heaven, but the reality is that's what we see. And eventually, they get to what's called Mount Sinai, which is in the Sinai Peninsula, the Middle East, and they encamp there. That's where God gives the 10 Commandments. That's where he gives the law. But also, Israel tends to just kind of stick there for a while. And that's where we're going to kind of pick up in chapter 18 here today. Moses is the leader of 1 million people. And we find a little bit about what is happening. His father-in-law, Jethro, is bringing his wife and his 2 sons to meet them in Sinai. Evidently, they didn't go with him to Egypt. And that's where we are in verse 13. In verse 13, it says, "The next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening." And so if you want to look at this picture here, there's over 1 million people. And over 1 million people are not always going to get along. Can you imagine that? I mean, I've got 6 people in my family we can't get along. You know, it's one of those realities. But sometimes people just don't get along. And so they would bring their disputes and arguments and different things all to Moses and want him to determine what the right thing to do was. And so he was doing this from morning to evening, morning to evening, morning to evening, day in and day out. Now, notice verse 14. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone, and all the people stand around you from morning till evening?" Now, I'm just going to throw this out. This question is never good. What is this that you are doing from morning to evening? Anytime in the Bible there is this, what is this that you are doing, or what is this that you have done, it is never a good thing. That is the question that God asks when you have messed up. And so Jethro basically is asking that same type of question, which we understand. He's about ready to let Moses know where he has messed up. So let's go on. And Moses goes on and says, well, listen, I've got to judge all these people, and I got to judge all these cases, and so on. And this is what his father-in-law says. In verse 17, Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing is not good." And I think this is a great statement, because he's able to look into Moses' life. He's able to kind of look in from the outside, and he's able to determine that what you are doing is not good. Now, I'm going to make an assumption and tell you something about yourself. There is something in your life that you are doing that is unhealthy. There's something in your life that you are doing that is not good. You know why I know that? Because we're all sinners here today. We all have this thing called flesh. And the reality is, even though we sometimes want to do this good thing, we do things all the time that are not good for us. Now, I don't know what yours is. I could sit here all day and tell you what mine are. Some of them you're just not going to know. The reality is we all have something in our life that is not good. And you probably know some of those things in your life that are not good. And so let's go ahead and read on, though, because we begin to understand a little bit more about this. Notice verse 18. He says, "You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone." And so I'm going to say something else about something that you are doing. Something that you're doing is not just unhealthy for you, it is unhealthy for those around you. In other words, your sin and the things that you're doing that are not beneficial to your relationship with Jesus Christ, they're not just affecting you, they're affecting everyone around you. Now, I remember something that happened my senior year of high school. We were playing Cunningham High School in basketball. It was the second to last game of the season, I think it was one. And here's what would have happened if we would have won that game. we would have been number one in our regionals. We probably would have gone to sub-state. It would have been a really cool thing, all right? But Brandon Shaffer stole the ball with less than a minute to go, and we were up by like 1 point. And so as I stole the ball, I saw one of my teammates that was already breaking down the court. He was all by his lonesome. All I had to do was pass him the ball, because again, you can always pass him faster than somebody could run. All I had to do was pass him the ball. He would just do this easy layup. We would go up by enough points that this other team could not come back and win. That's all I had to do. But I got excited, and I launched the ball over Paul Anderson's head. Out of bounds. Cunningham got the ball, went down, scored. We lost the game. We weren't first in sub-state. We are first in regional, and we didn't go to sub-state that year. So my mistake carried consequences to the entire team. So there's something we're doing, though, in our lives that's more monumental than that. More monumental than a basketball game that is hurting people around us. His father-in-law continues to talk to him, and we get to verses 19 through 22, and he says, "Now obey my voice, I will give you advice, and God will be with you." I kind of look at this statement where he's very emphatic, saying, listen here, Moses, what I'm about ready to tell you, this is big. And what I'm about ready to tell you, this is important. He goes, you shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God, and you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy, and hate a bribe, and place men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens, and let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear a burden with you. Now here's what I love about this. It's almost as though Jethro, in a matter of speaking, is just basically saying, Moses, you need to stop. You need to stop doing what you're doing, and you need to do life differently. Now, I don't know if you've ever had somebody speak that boldly into your life, but sometimes we need that voice of somebody telling us that we need to stop. And there's really a couple important details that really come out of verse 18, and I think this is the reason why. Number one, Jethro says, you're going to wear yourself out. If you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to wear yourself out. You're going to put a burden on yourself that is huge. And not only that, not only is it going to wear yourself out, it's going to affect and impact the people around you. And so here is the reality that I think we have to come up with. Not stopping comes with a price. There are things that we are doing in our lives that if we do not stop them, it will come with a price. And sometimes that price is severe. So let me just throw this out. Some of you know this, some of you don't. If you don't know this, I like bacon. Okay? In fact, I love bacon. I'll be the first to tell you that I'm so glad that I don't have to follow the Old Testament law and not have pork. Okay, I love the fact that I'm able to eat bacon and thick bacon. And when it's fried, it's just so yummy, and bacon anything. And I'm going to say bacon toothpaste and stuff like that. People have actually given that stuff to me. That's not good, but bacon is really good. Now, let me just tell you, I'm going to the doctor tomorrow morning. I'm going to the doctor tomorrow morning, have been feeling well, different things like that. And so let's just imagine she would say, Brandon, I know you like bacon. And so what I need you to do is I need you to stop eating bacon. And if you do not stop eating bacon, you are going to die. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go home and hug my family and tell them goodbye. Okay, actually not. I'm going to stop eating bacon. And the reality is, I know that bacon's not good for me, and I try to eat it in moderation. But there's certain things that we have to understand that if we continue with a behavior, we continue with an attitude, we continue with an addiction, whatever it might be, it is going to come at a cost if we do not stop. And so we're not just talking about giving up bacon here. We're talking about serious stuff. This could end your marriage. This could end relationships. This could hinder your relationship with God. There's so many things that could really come into play that if we do not stop, there's a price that we are going to have to pay, and we don't want to pay that price. But I want you to notice verse 23. In verse 23, in fact, this is the one I have underlined in my Bible. It says here, if you do this, in other words, if you stop, God will direct you, and you will be able to endure, and all this people will also go to their place in peace. So I'm going to tell you there's benefits to stopping. In fact, in this particular instance, Moses was wearing himself out. Moses had zero margin in his life. All he was dealing with was really kind of people's difficulties in their life. And I think it was leading to a place where it was all-consuming. And when something is all-consuming, here's something I'm just going to tell you. When something is all-consuming and it's always on our mind is not focused in on God. And when it takes every bit of our time, we do not have time for God. So what he was doing is basically saying, Moses, you need to create some margin in your life. And if you do, God will direct you. In fact, I think this is crucial for us to understand here, that when we free up some margin in our life to where we're not so dadgum busy, we're able to focus in and listen to the voice of God. I know that that's true for me. But it's not just that. He says you will also be able to endure. I don't know if you're aware of this. In fact, I could look at marriages. I could look at families. I could look at work life, different things like that. I could even look at church. In fact, I'm studying through the book of Hebrews right now in my personal time. And one of the great calls of the book of Hebrews is for the church to endure, because people are dropping out. And I tell you, one of the great frustrations of ministry is seeing people come and see people go, and see people come and see people go, because they don't endure. And so he said, listen, if you're able to stop some of this stuff, you're going to be able to endure, but it's also going to be best for the people. It's going to bring peace to the people. It's going to be good for those around you. And so then we get to verse 24. And in verse 24, it says, so Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. In other words, and this is our bottom line here today, Moses listened and decided to stop. He decided to stop doing life the way that he was doing, and he chose to start doing life a different way. And so today, the same call that Moses received from Jethro is a call into our lives, as there's certain things in our life that is not good, and we need to decide to stop. And the question is, will we listen to that voice, or will we continue to do destructive behavior, addictive behavior, attitudes that are not holy? Because, and I'm going to share something about me, I like comfort. Anybody here like comfort? I love comfort. In fact, this afternoon, I'm going to go home and I'm going to watch the Dallas Cowboys play football, hopefully win. Hopefully win. Let's pray over that right now. But the reality is, I'm not going to be in what I am right now. I'm going to have home pants on. You know what home pants are? You know, the kind of the pajama pants and so on like that. And so I'm going to make this announcement again, because I'm going to make this every time I talk about home pants. Home pants are not Walmart pants. Okay, can we just all agree on that? And so let me just throw this out. If you wear home pants to Walmart, you need to make a distinct decision in your life to stop. Okay, let's just kind of throw that out right now. But we love comfort, and a lot of the stuff that we do in our lives that is really not good for us is because we've allowed negative behavior, we have allowed harmful behavior to become very comfortable in our lives. And so while we know we need to stop, it becomes uncomfortable to do so. So what I'd like to do for the remainder of our time here this morning is I want to dive into our next steps a little bit longer than what we normally do, but I want to ask one question as we kind of go in here. Who is your Jethro? Jethro spoke truth into Moses' life. Jethro came and he said, listen, what you're doing is not good. I'm going to venture to say that this was something that predated this event right here, that as his father-in-law, and Moses used to be a shepherd employed by his father-in-law, as he was doing that, I'm going to venture to say that there were multiple times in Moses' life where Jethro came to him and he spoke truth into him. And I'm going to tell you that unless you have a Jethro, or unless you have Jethros, here's the reality: you're going to continue in behavior that is not good. You're going to continue into patterns of life that are not good because you don't have anybody reminding you, even though you know in the back of your head that these are not healthy, you don't have anybody reminding you and pushing you and calling you to stop. So who is your Jethro that is able to speak into your life? Now also here, I want you to fill in this blank here this morning. I need to stop. Now I'm going to tell you, I need more than one line. I've got a lot of lines that I could fill in here of things that I need to stop. And if you're like me, you're probably going, where do I start? Because there's so much that I need to stop. And so what I'd like for you to do is consider what it is that you need to stop. And as we do this, I want to read a verse to you. In fact, I want to go back to Hebrews chapter 12. I'm going to read verse 1. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Here's the reality. There are certain things of life that are not good for your relationship with Jesus, that are not necessarily in the category of sin. And there are things that are not good in your relationship with Jesus that do fit into the category of sin. We are called to stop both of those in our lives. So let's consider what some of those things might be things that hinder and things that just might be in the category of sin. It might be addiction. And addiction kind of has a lot of tentacles in our society today. So it might be alcohol and it might be drugs that has a handle on your life. And it might be pornography. It might be nicotine. It might even be food that has become an addiction in your life and has really grabbed a hold of you. And let me just say this. If you're dealing with one of those, I'm going to venture to say that you will not be able to just stop. That your desire to stop may not be as big as the addiction. And so you will probably need a Jethro or many Jethros, and you might even need professional help to deal with that particular addiction in your life. But it also could just go into, here's one that my wife and I have talked about. I deal with this in my own life, and is allowing technology to always be a distraction and an influence in our life. We talk about screen time, and if we're not careful, we are always on our screens. Would you agree with that? And we are always like, and they have that thing that, have you ever heard this? It's called phantom vibration syndrome, where you feel a vibration and you don't even have your phone on you, but it's that reality because it's there. And so that can lead into risky behavior, that can lead into influential behavior, but it can also just be one of those things that it always distracts. I'm afraid I'm going to miss an email. I'm afraid I'm going to miss a text. I'm afraid I'm going to miss a score, and I end up neglecting my family. And so maybe that's something that we need to allow a limit, or maybe even just stop in our lives. It might be busyness. I'm one of those. I come by this very naturally. I feel if I am not busy, I am not carrying my weight. If I'm not doing something productive, then I don't have value. And so I can take a lot of energy in my life and put toward busyness to prove to myself that I'm good enough. But here's the problem. When I'm busy, I don't allow for margin for God to be able to speak into my life. And so a lot of times what I just need to do is stop. Just stop doing what I'm doing and allow for there to be time where Jesus is speaking into my life. It may be the way that you think. In fact, you may need to stop thinking the way that you think. It's easy to get into worry and anxiety and depression and all of that area of things to where our mind is always focused in on our problems. And I don't know about you, but I can go there real easily. But here's where I struggle in the way that I think. I'm always telling myself I'm not good enough. That's a tape that's playing in the back of my head. And so I'm always beating myself up. And so sometimes we have to kind of rewire or re-record that tape that's playing back there. And it might even be that your attitude is bringing in toward criticism of your spouse, and your attitude and the way you think is bringing on criticism toward other people, or maybe organizations like the church, or maybe even God. And so we may have to rethink the way that we think. We may have to rethink the way that we spend. I mean, one of the things that I keep hearing is the economy is great, but here's what I'm also hearing. Personal debt is at an all-time high. So maybe we need to change the way that we spend. Maybe we just need to stop spending money. I tell that to my wife all the time, and she does not listen. Maybe it's relationships. Maybe there's a friendship that's not healthy. Maybe there is a dating relationship that's not healthy. Maybe it's a work relationship. Or one of the things that is really big in our society, in fact, there is a term for this, and I absolutely hate this term, work spouse. Have you heard that? This is my work spouse. That is so wrong. And maybe that's a relationship that needs to stop. We could go on, folks. We could go on and talk about a lot of things. But please understand, what I'm saying here today is not pop psychology. What I'm saying here today is it's not just so you can have a better version of yourself. What I'm talking about is when we make decisions to stop, it allows Jesus to write his story into our lives. That's what this is really about. So that our story, we're not the star of the show, Jesus can become the star of the show. So I want to suggest something today, and I wish I would have come up with this, but I'm going to suggest something that as you're thinking about what is it that I need to stop, here's the very most important thing. Seek Jesus, and notice and then is bigger up here. Seek Jesus and then choose one. I don't know about you, but I can get into that habit of saying I need to stop and I need to stop and I need to stop, but I never invite Jesus into the equation. And if you never invite Jesus into the equation, you're gonna like start to stop, and you're gonna be frustrated, and then you're gonna try again, and you're gonna be frustrated, and you're gonna try again. It's this endless cycle of frustration. We need to bring Jesus in here and say, Jesus, I want to seek you first. And ultimately, I want to allow Jesus to speak into me and say, Brandon, this is what you need to stop. This is the decision that if you make this one, it will snowball into helping you stop some other things in your life. So what is it that I need to do more than anything else? I need to seek Jesus. Because without Jesus, I'm without hope. In fact, I want to share something that I read many years ago, and I don't even know who said this. Without Christ, life is an endless, a hopeless end. But life with Christ is an endless hope. You see, when we invite Jesus into this picture, it changes everything. So I want to ask you, will you seek Jesus? Will you seek Jesus and really ask him, Jesus, write my story. Reveal to me what it is that you are wanting to write into my life. What are you asking me right now to stop? Just give me one, because here's me. I can't handle more than one. Jesus, write your story into my life. Will you join me in prayer? Jesus, right now,